All right, let's jump right into this explainer and run a massive systemic stress test on human society. We're going to see exactly what happens if non-human intelligence is suddenly, undeniably confirmed. Today, we're diving deep into the dark side of disclosure, analyzing how our modern world might completely fracture if we're forced to confront a reality that is vastly more advanced than our own.
Because honestly, you really have to ask yourself, what if the biggest threat of alien contact isn't actually the aliens, but us? It totally challenges our baseline assumptions, right? Pop culture has basically trained us to watch the skies for laser beams and flying saucers, but the actual real-world structural risks lie right here at home, in our financial markets, our trust in institutions, and our own psychological fragility.
To really understand this threat, we have to draw a very hard line between a gentle, soft disclosure and a sudden, hard disclosure. Finding fossilized microbes on Mars, that's soft disclosure. I mean, it's a profound scientific discovery, sure, but it doesn't change how you pay your mortgage, right? Hard disclosure, on the other hand, we're talking crashed hardware, undeniable proof of clandestine contact with advanced non-human intelligence, or NHI. That is an immediate, paradigm-shattering event that could literally break our systems.
So, here's the roadmap for how we're breaking down this risk assessment. We'll cover the myth of panic, blueprints for secrecy, the collapse of trust, economic shocks, and finally, the hostile contact scenario.
Okay, part 1. The myth of panic. Why little green men aren't the problem. Let's look at why the whole Hollywood-style panic cliché isn't actually what the experts are worried about.
The idea that people are just going to instantly riot in the streets at the mere mention of aliens is a massive misconception. Empirical data shows humanity would handle the news of distant or microbial life pretty well. Studies out of Arizona State University show that when presented with hypothetical discoveries, public reaction skews way more toward curiosity than fear. Remember the ALH 84001 Martian meteorite in '96? The public was totally fascinated, but society didn't shut down, we're adaptable. But remember, that's distant, low-stakes data. Hard disclosure is a completely different beast.
Which brings us to Section 2, Blueprints for Secrecy, the Architecture of Narrative Control.
So, if widespread panic isn't a guaranteed response, why all the historical secrecy? Well, for decades, official policy hasn't really been about protecting us from aliens. It's been about protecting the status quo from us. Elite planners have historically viewed human perception as the ultimate wild card. Take the 1938 War of the Worlds radio broadcast. Regardless of how exaggerated the actual panic was, it became this powerful mythic precedent. It completely convinced authorities that the public couldn't handle anomalous threats, laying the entire groundwork for managed narratives.
And you can see this perfectly with the CIA-convened Robertson Panel in 1953. They explicitly recommended stripping UFOs of their mystery through aggressive debunking. They weren't looking at this as a cool scientific mystery to solve, they saw it as a massive stability vulnerability. By mocking the phenomenon, they aimed to neutralize the risk of the public demanding answers that the government simply didn't have.
Then you have the 1960 Brookings Report, commissioned by NASA. This document noted that anthropological records show societies routinely disintegrate when forced into contact with technologically superior civilizations. They literally floated the idea of withholding information to preserve order. They were terrified of our foundational beliefs being destabilized.
Moving on to Section 3, the collapse of trust, the epistemic fracture. This is where things get really concerning.
This is our first major failure mode. What happens when an 80-year cover-up is suddenly dragged into the daylight? If the government flips overnight from, "You're all crazy, there's nothing to see here," to, "Yeah, actually, we've known about this for decades," the fallout would be absolutely catastrophic. Public trust craters completely. Imagine the scientific community realizing their entire careers were artificially constrained because vital data was locked in classified silos. Imagine the fury directed at the media for complicity in decades of ridicule. The entire bedrock of institutional trust just evaporates.
And to make matters infinitely worse, factor in the digital age. Compounding this trust collapse, highly capable bad actors could just flood the zone with deepfakes, holograms, and synthetic experiences. We already struggle to agree on basic facts today. Injecting the reality of NHI into that environment creates the ultimate breeding ground for paranoia. It would be nearly impossible to coordinate because we couldn't even agree on what was genuine.
Let's dive into Section 4, Economic and Systemic Shocks, the Macroeconomic War Game.
Beyond the psychological impact, the sheer financial devastation of a hard disclosure could be totally unprecedented. Let's talk about the alien carbon bubble. The crucial takeaway here is that releasing advanced energy tech isn't just a fun scientific miracle. If disclosure reveals scalable zero-point energy or reactionless drives, it renders trillions of dollars in legacy energy sectors utterly worthless overnight. The global energy market, which underpins literally the entire world economy, faces an instant existential crisis.
You're compressing an energy transition that should take a century into a few years, and the result is violent destabilization. We're talking cascading defaults, investors panic fleeing legacy manufacturing, and extreme volatility in defense equities. Nations that rely entirely on oil exports, they'd face instant sovereign debt crises. It completely upends global power dynamics and creates massive, sudden unemployment.
Alongside that economic implosion, society would be dealing with ontological shock. This is a profound meaning crisis. When humanity suddenly realizes we aren't the pinnacle of creation anymore, traditional belief systems are going to be stress-tested to their absolute limits. Some will adapt, sure, but others will completely fracture, potentially spawning radical new movements or authoritarian cults that prioritize supposed alien directives over human ethics.
And we can't ignore cosmic provincialism. This is a fascinating one. If vastly older, superior civilizations exist, humanity might suffer a species-level demoralization. Think about it. Why struggle for decades to cure diseases or solve complex physics problems if a vastly superior intelligence already has all the answers? We could see a massive loss of autonomy, leading to widespread cultural stagnation and intellectual dependency.
Finally, Section 5, the hostile contact scenario, absolute power asymmetry.
We absolutely must look at the darkest failure mode of all, the terrifying prospect that the visitors aren't friendly. The brilliant physicist Stephen Hawking hit the nail on the head here. He starkly warned us about the intelligence trap and the grim history of profound power asymmetry. Throughout human history, when a highly advanced society encounters a less advanced one, it almost universally ends in exploitation or total collapse for the less advanced group. We would have literally zero leverage.
And hostility doesn't necessarily mean a Hollywood-style invasion with giant lasers. A hostile NHI could just quietly disable our orbital infrastructure or nuclear commands. They could use biological contaminants or targeted psychological warfare to fragment us from the inside out. Even the mere perception of hostility would turbocharge global militarization, giving governments the perfect excuse to suspend civil liberties permanently under the guise of planetary defense.
Because in a hostile scenario, disclosure is not a press conference. It is a full-blown crisis onset. We are instantly plunged into an existential survival event, transitioning irreversibly to a fully mobilized, paranoid, and defensive planetary posture.
And this is where it all comes together and falls apart. The true danger lies in these failure modes compounding. Human society is a highly complex system, and complex systems fail non-linearly when hit simultaneously. We rarely get the luxury of facing just one crisis at a time.
These combined shocks represent the ultimate stress test. Imagine learning that a hostile force is real. At the exact same moment, you realize your institutions have lied to you about it for 80 years. You pair an economic implosion with a profound epistemic fracture, and then throw in synthetic media generating fake sightings to manipulate a terrified public. It would completely paralyze our ability to mount any kind of unified human response.
We might like to think we're emotionally resilient enough to handle the idea of aliens. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this. Can our fragile human institutions actually survive the reality? Understanding these systemic failure points is absolutely crucial, because the structural integrity of our society is what will ultimately determine if we weather the storm of disclosure or if we just collapse under our own weight. Keep questioning everything, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.